The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold glare across the sleek glass walls of the conference room. The air was thick with tension, and every word felt like it carried the weight of an unspoken war. Across the table sat Adrian Monroe, CEO of Luminatech, a man whose reputation for arrogance preceded him. His tailored suit screamed wealth, but his smirk spoke volumes about his character. Clara Hayes sat at the opposite end of the table, her fingers gripping the edge of her leather portfolio so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She wasn't one to let emotions show in professional settings, yet today, she could feel her composure slipping. Her heart pounded in her chest as Adrian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, exuding an air of superiority that made her skin crawl. "You're underperforming," he said bluntly, his voice dripping with condescension. "And frankly, your salary doesn't reflect the value you bring to this company." Underperforming? Clara's mind reeled. She had single-handedly spearheaded 3 major projects in the past 6 months alone, each bringing record-breaking profits to Luminatech. Yet here she was, being told by this smug CEO that her worth amounted to less than what he paid his personal assistant. It wasn't just infuriating, it was insulting. But anger wasn't new to Clara. What surprised her more was how calm she managed to remain on the surface. She straightened her posture, meeting Adrian's gaze head-on. There was something else simmering beneath her frustration, something far more dangerous: resolve. What Adrian didn't know, and what no one else in the company suspected, was that Clara held a secret weapon. Hidden deep within the labyrinthine codebase of Luminatech's proprietary software system was a kill switch. A failsafe embedded during the initial development phase when Clara had been part of the original team building the platform from scratch. At the time, it had seemed like a harmless safeguard, a way to ensure control over the system if anything went wrong. But now, it represented power. Power that Adrian would never see coming. As Adrian continued to drone on about performance metrics and cost-cutting measures, Clara tuned out his words and focused instead on the ticking clock inside her head. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about respect. About proving to herself, and to him, that she was more than just another cog in his corporate machine. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, sitting across from a man who thought he owned everything, including her talents, and yet, she possessed the ability to bring his empire crashing down with a few keystrokes. Not that she wanted to destroy the company outright. No, destruction wasn't her goal. Justice was. Adrian finally stopped talking long enough to glance at his watch, clearly eager to move on to whatever trivial matter awaited him next. He slid a thin folder across the table toward her. Inside were documents outlining her reduced compensation package. Reduced. As if she hadn't already sacrificed enough for this job: late nights, missed family dinners, weekends spent debugging lines of code while others relaxed. And now this. Clara picked up the folder, flipping through its contents without truly seeing them. Her thoughts raced ahead, calculating risks and possibilities. Could she use the kill switch as leverage? Would it be enough to force Adrian into recognizing her true worth? Or would doing so expose her to retaliation she couldn't predict? She closed the folder with deliberate slowness, setting it aside before clasping her hands together on the table. For a brief moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Then, with a steadiness that surprised even herself, Clara spoke. "I understand where you're coming from, Adrian," she began, her tone measured but firm. "But I think we need to have a deeper conversation about contributions versus compensation." Adrian raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Go on." Clara took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "You mentioned performance metrics earlier. Let's talk specifics. My work on Project Helix increased quarterly revenue by 40%. That's not conjecture, that's fact. And yet, my current compensation reflects none of that success." He waved a dismissive hand. "Numbers don't tell the whole story. Leadership qualities matter too." Leadership. Clara couldn't help the sharp edge that crept into her voice. "I led a team of 12 engineers through a project most seasoned managers would have struggled with. We delivered ahead of schedule, under budget, and exceeded expectations. If that's not leadership, then I don't know what is." For the first time since the meeting began, Adrian looked mildly uncomfortable. But only for a second. He quickly recovered, leaning forward slightly. "Look, Clara, I'm not denying your technical skills. But running a company requires balancing multiple factors. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. The greater good? Clara echoed, incredulous. Or your bottom line? Before Adrian could respond, there was a knock at the door. One of his assistants poked her head in, whispering urgently into his ear. Whatever she said caused Adrian's face to darken momentarily, though he quickly masked it with indifference. He stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. We'll continue this discussion later, he said brusquely, heading for the door. Think about what I've said. Clara watched him go, her pulse still racing. Once the door clicked shut behind him, she allowed herself a small bitter smile. Oh, she'd think about it all right. But not in the way he expected. Later that evening, Clara found herself hunched over her laptop in her dimly lit apartment. The glow of the screen illuminated her face as she navigated through layers of encrypted files. Each keystroke brought her closer to the heart of Luminatech's infrastructure, the very core of its operations. Somewhere buried within those lines of code lay the kill switch. A digital ace up her sleeve. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her, pulling her attention away briefly. It was a text from Mia, her best friend and confidant. How did it go? Clara hesitated before typing a reply. About as well as expected. Mia responded almost instantly. Asterisk that bad? Want me to come over? Wine and vent sesh. Asterisk. Clara chuckled softly, grateful for the offer. Thanks, but I've got some thinking to do. After sending the message, she returned her focus to the screen. Thinking was exactly what she needed to do, but not about whether she deserved better treatment. No, that much was clear. What she needed to decide was how far she was willing to go to make Adrian understand the gravity of his actions. It wasn't just about revenge, though the temptation lingered tantalizingly close. It was about leveling the playing field. About forcing someone who had always held all the cards to realize they weren't untouchable. And perhaps in doing so, reminding herself that she wasn't powerless either. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she accessed the final layer of security protocols guarding the kill switch. With one command, she could trigger a cascade of events that would cripple Luminatech's systems temporarily, or permanently, depending on how she chose to wield it. But timing mattered. Strategy mattered. One misstep, and she risked losing everything. As midnight approached, Clara leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Tomorrow would be crucial. She needed to gather evidence, proof of her contributions, documentation of Adrian's dismissive attitude, anything that could bolster her position. Because once she activated the kill switch, there would be no turning back. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind swirling with scenarios and outcomes. By dawn, she had crafted a plan. It wasn't foolproof, but it gave her hope. Hope that justice might finally find its way into the sterile halls of Luminatech. When morning arrived, Clara dressed in her sharpest suit, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As she stepped out of her apartment and into the crisp autumn air, she felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about fighting back against Adrian Monroe. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her worth, her future. And as she walked toward the towering skyscraper that housed Luminatech, Clara knew one thing for certain: Adrian had underestimated her. Big mistake. The glass doors of Luminatech slid open with a soft whoosh, and Clara stepped inside, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The lobby buzzed with early morning energy, employees rushing to meetings, interns clutching coffee cups like lifelines, and security guards nodding politely as they scanned badges. To anyone watching, she looked calm, collected, the picture of professionalism. But beneath that composed exterior, her mind was a storm of calculations and contingencies. She took the elevator to her office on the 8th floor, ignoring the curious glances from coworkers who had undoubtedly heard whispers about yesterday's meeting with Adrian. Rumors spread faster than code updates at Luminatech, and Clara knew her name was already trending in hushed conversations around water coolers. Let them talk, she thought. They'll know soon enough what I'm capable of. Her desk was immaculate, as always, a reflection of her meticulous nature. She powered up her computer and opened a secure file folder labeled Project Helix Documentation. It contained every email, report, and presentation she'd ever created for the project. Buried within those files were also screenshots of Adrian's dismissive comments during team meetings, his reluctance to allocate resources, and his failure to acknowledge her contributions publicly. This wasn't just evidence, it was ammunition. For the next hour, Clara worked feverishly, compiling data into a single irrefutable document titled Clara Hayes' Value Proposition. She included graphs showing revenue increases directly tied to her work, testimonials from colleagues praising her leadership, and even snippets of client feedback highlighting her role in their success. When she was done, she saved 2 copies, one encrypted on her personal drive and another uploaded to an external server accessible only by her. By mid-morning, she received a notification on her company phone, an invitation to a last-minute executive strategy meeting. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Her lips curved into a faint smile as she grabbed her laptop and headed to the boardroom. The boardroom was a fortress of privilege, its walls lined with mahogany paneling and adorned with abstract art pieces worth more than most people's annual salaries. Around the table sat Luminateca's top brass, CFO Marcus Lane, CTO Rachel Park, Head of Marketing Greg Novak, and of course, Adrian Monroe. Clara slipped into her usual seat near the end of the table, placing her laptop in front of her without making eye contact with anyone. Adrian glanced at her briefly before launching into the agenda. "We're here to discuss Q4 projections," he began, gesturing to the screen behind him where a PowerPoint presentation displayed financial charts. "As you can see, we're slightly behind target. I want everyone to focus on cost optimization moving forward." Cost optimization. There it was again, the thinly veiled euphemism for cutting corners and squeezing employees until they bled efficiency. Clara clenched her jaw but kept her expression neutral. Patience, she reminded herself. Timing is everything. As the discussion unfolded, Clara listened intently, waiting for her moment. When Marcus brought up Project Helix as a case study for improving margins, she saw her opening. "Actually," Clara interjected, her voice steady and authoritative, "I think there's more to discuss regarding Project Helix." All eyes turned to her, some curious, others skeptical. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" Clara stood, turning her laptop toward the group so they could see the screen. On it was the first page of her meticulously prepared document. Project Helix generated $12 million in additional revenue this quarter alone. Yet, despite leading the team responsible for that success, my compensation remains stagnant. In fact, it's being reduced. A murmur rippled through the room. Rachel frowned, glancing between Clara and Adrian. "Reduced? Why?" Adrian shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It's a matter of aligning pay with performance metrics. Clara's contributions, while valuable, don't justify her current salary." Clara didn't miss a beat. "Let's clarify something," she said, advancing to the next slide. It showed a timeline of key milestones for Project Helix, each accompanied by statistics proving her direct involvement. "Without my work, this project wouldn't exist. Without my leadership, your cost optimization would collapse under its own weight." Greg nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "She has a point, Adrian. These numbers speak for themselves." Marcus chimed in, flipping through the printed copy Clara had discreetly distributed earlier. "And these testimonials, they paint a very different picture than what we've been led to believe." Adrian's face darkened, but he wasn't ready to concede defeat. "This is all well and good, but running a company requires tough decisions. Sometimes sacrifices must be made." Clara leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. "Sacrifices? You mean exploiting hard-working employees because you assume they won't fight back?" The room fell silent. Even Adrian seemed taken aback by her boldness. Clara pressed on, knowing she had them hooked. "I've spent years building systems that keep this company running smoothly. Systems you rely on every day. What happens when those systems fail?" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Fail? Are you threatening us?" Clara shook her head, her tone measured yet firm. "Not a threat. A warning. If Luminatech continues down this path of undervaluing its people, the consequences will ripple far beyond just me." Adrian slammed his fist on the table, his patience snapping. "Enough. You're out of line, Clara. If you're unhappy, maybe this isn't the right place for you." Clara smiled, a cold, calculated curve of her lips. "Maybe not. But before I go, let me remind you of something." She pulled out her phone, tapping a few commands. Across the room, the lights flickered momentarily, drawing startled gasps from the executives. That was a preview of what happens when the foundation of your empire starts to crumble. Panic flashed across Adrian's face. What did you do? Nothing yet, Clara replied calmly. But rest assured, if necessary, I can bring this entire operation to its knees. And trust me, Adrian, rebuilding won't come cheap. The room erupted into chaos. Marcus demanded answers, Rachel questioned IT protocols, and Greg stared at Clara with a mix of awe and fear. Only Adrian remained frozen, his arrogance replaced by raw vulnerability. When the commotion subsided, Clara spoke again, her voice carrying an air of finality. I'm not asking for much. Fair compensation. Recognition for my work. Respect. Give me that, and we never have to revisit this conversation. Deny me, and you'll learn exactly how fragile your empire really is. With that, she gathered her things and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a stunned audience grappling with the realization that they had grossly underestimated the quiet woman in the corner. Back at her desk, Clara allowed herself a moment of triumph. She hadn't activated the kill switch, not fully, but she'd planted the seed of doubt in Adrian's mind. Now, it was a waiting game. Would he cave to her demands, or would he dig in his heels and risk everything? Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Mia. Still alive? Clara chuckled softly as she typed her reply. More than alive. Thriving. But deep down, she knew the battle was far from over. Adrian Monroe wasn't the type to admit defeat easily. He'd retaliate, perhaps even try to discredit her. And when he did, Clara would need to be ready. For now though, she savored the small victory, knowing she'd finally tipped the scales in her favor. As the afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting golden light across her workspace, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fighting back anymore. It was about proving to herself and to the world that she was unstoppable. Weeks later, Adrian reluctantly agreed to reinstate Clara's salary and grant her a substantial raise, publicly acknowledging her critical role in Luminateca's success. The board, impressed by her boldness and skill, offered her a senior leadership position, ensuring her contributions would never be overlooked again. Clara accepted but insisted on implementing new policies to protect employees from exploitation. With justice served, Clara stood on the rooftop of Luminateca's building at sunset, the city skyline stretching before her. For the first time in years, she felt truly free, respected, valued, and unafraid to demand what she deserved. As Mia joined her with 2 glasses of champagne, they clinked them together, celebrating not just victory, but the start of a brighter future. Clara smiled, knowing she had changed more than just her own life, she had sparked change for everyone around her.